nothing I've ever done shows up. I've done a lot of really important work, and I'm not a hateful person. I'm against anti-Semitism. I do a lot of work to combat anti-Semitism. I do a lot of work to expose corruption on both sides of the aisle. And it's unfortunate that these companies have worked to suppress me so much, because everything that shows up under my name on Google is just a hit piece. Everything. It's just false information. And these people will go to any length to smear me and make it so that no one can really know who I truly am.
Welcome to TechPost.io. I'm your host, Trent Lipinski, and you might remember me from another tech podcast, but I am no longer with them, and I am now doing my own thing. So please make sure to follow me at TechPost.io. You can also follow me personally at Trent Lipinski on Twitter, and please stay tuned. We're going to have some amazing new guests and interviews coming up soon. But in this episode, we're going to talk to Laura Loomer. She's one of the most censored women in America. She's a journalist and an activist. And previous to recording this episode, she had not yet been banned from Facebook. But since we recorded this and I've been having trouble getting this episode released, she's no longer allowed on Facebook or Instagram. So this is an amazing interview. We talk about her being banned from Twitter, Uber, Lyft, PayPal, and all these major social platforms before she was even banned from Facebook. And now it really puts this interview into more context now that she's been banned from Facebook and Instagram as well. So please stay tuned. This is a fascinating interview. And trigger warning, if you're politically on the left, we do deal with reality and talk about censorship. So if that offends you, I guess stop listening or whatever. I don't care. So if you're a person who wants to know what's actually happening, hear from Laura Loomer herself, this is a great episode. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Laura Loomer. Hey, Laura, tell us a bit about who you are and what you're working on.
Thanks for having me. Well, my name is Laura Loomer. I'm a conservative investigative journalist, and I'm probably the most censored woman in America. I've been banned from nearly every single platform and continue to be silenced and banned by tech tyrants in Silicon Valley who wish to suppress my voice and silence me simply because I'm conservative, and they've deemed that what I do and what I say is hateful.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for having you on the show because, they use the term, oh, you're giving her a platform. But at the same time, when I Google you, I've got a lot of experience as a journalist, as a writer myself. Like, I know fake news when I see it, and I can't figure out what the hell is true or not. So I wanted to have you on the show, talk to you as a human being, and figure out, like, what the hell the actual story is, because your Wikipedia page is like crazy to me. Like I haven't seen a smear page like this in a while. So
Yeah.
Who did you piss off to have all these smear articles written about you? Like, what is the backstory here? Why are you one of the most censored women in America? And why are you, dealing with all this censorship from the tech industry?
Well, you're right. My Wikipedia page is full of smears, and unfortunately, they've locked it, so I'm not able to edit it. And then even though they lock it, they allow for left-wingers from far-left publications like Daily Beast and SPLC and the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is actually a designated Islamic terrorist organization, to edit the page and smear me and lie about me and accuse me of things like being a neo-Nazi. They call me a member of the alt-right, even though I'm a Zionist, I'm Jewish. I mean, you can't be a member of the alt-right if you're a Zionist, right? So nobody ever stops to think and say to themselves, wow, Laura Loomer is actually a really big advocate for Israel. Laura Loomer was the person who exposed Linda Sarsour and all of the Jew hatred in the Women's March. It doesn't really seem like she's the type to go wave a white pride flag or a neo-Nazi flag at the Unite the Right rally, right? I mean, they don't look at the facts and look at my actual statements. Instead, they just use and abuse their power by having access to tech companies and tech CEOs and having the same political ideology as these people who operate Silicon Valley, and they use it to smear me and deplatform me simply because I'm exposing the truth. And one of the things that people say about me is that they accuse me of being an Islamophobe, right? They say that I'm anti-Muslim. But I challenge anybody who thinks that I'm anti-Muslim or hateful to show me anything I've ever said about Muslims that isn't true, anything I've ever said about Islam that isn't factually true. Most of the time, people get so triggered because I pull direct verses out of the Quran, and I'm just very effective in exposing people, right? Because of my own style of investigative journalism, which people have come to know as getting bloomered people. And so I'm known for confronting people kind of in their face and getting in their face with my camera and calling them out. I actually confronted Jack Dorsey while he was testifying to Congress back in September, because Dorsey's a liar, right? This is a guy who had the audacity to sit in front of members of Congress and waste taxpayer dollars, and he committed perjury. He sat there, lied to members of Congress, and said that he doesn't censor and shadow ban conservatives. But then when you look at the Project Veritas tapes and the Project Veritas expose that was released last year, you have Twitter senior engineers and employees admitting that they shadow ban and they use algorithms to identify people who are pro-Trump, people who believe in God, people who have American flag emojis, people who are pro-Second Amendment, and they silence them, right? And so he lied to Congress. And even Jack Dorsey himself has admitted that Twitter has a left-leaning bias, okay? And that they haven't been good in implementing their policies fairly. All right,
you admitted a lot of this on the Joe Rogan podcast, both in the first episode with Joe Rogan and the second one with Tim Pool. And Tim Pool brought a lot of these facts up, and Jack had no argument. It was an very interesting episode to watch, because we got to see a journalist actually question Jack Dorsey, and his statements were very different than what he said during his testimony in front of Congress.
Right. And any other regular person who didn't have the luxury of having billions of dollars like Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg do would go to jail for committing perjury, for lying to Congress. And so why does Jack Dorsey get an excuse, or why does he get a pass for lying to the American people and saying they don't ban and silence people when they do? I mean, the very next day he banned Alex Jones from his platform and said that, it's so toxic to have Alex Jones on Twitter and to give a voice to hate. Well, I want to know, if Jack Dorsey is so concerned about hate speech and is so concerned about violence and what he calls conversational health on his platform, why is it that he allows for people to call for the assassination of President Trump? Did you know that's a felony? Calling for the assassination of a president, that's a felony. You can go to jail. Why does he allow for designated Islamic terrorist organizations like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood to have Twitter accounts? Did you know that in November of 2017, Jack Dorsey unverified me on Twitter, and he unverified me in the same group as people like Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler, when I have nothing to do with it? And the Twitter story of the day, you know how they have their little news logos at the top? Falsely accused me of being a white supremacist. And so I was flooded with death threats from people accusing me of being a Nazi and a white supremacist, even though I'm Jewish. Every single news article now refers to me as a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist. It's cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can never get a job doing anything in, the regular workforce outside of politics or activism, because people Google me and everything's been, reported that I'm a neo-Nazi because Twitter unverified neo-Nazis and white supremacists. And nothing I've ever done would suggest that I support white supremacy or Nazi, the Nazi ideology.
You're a journalist. I mean, I first started following you when you were covering the Las Vegas shooting, because you were the only journalist who was asking real questions. You had press credentials. You were going to the police briefings. You were asking the deputies and the detectives real questions. You were the only one in the room asking real questions.
Well, I forced them to change their timeline. If you recall, the FBI was lying to the American people, and they said that Stephen Paddock, he checked in on the 28th, and I obtained room receipts, and I was able to prove that he checked in on the 25th. And because I was effective in exposing the FBI and the LVMPD, I was banned from the press conferences, even though they were forced to admit I was correct. And so I've broken more stories than most journalists will ever break in their entire lifetime. I worked for Project Veritas. I was undercover in the Hillary Clinton campaign for 2 years, exposing voter fraud. And I have accomplished a lot of things. President Trump was tweeting my videos and talking about my exposés at Project Veritas when he was in the debates between Hillary Clinton. So for Jack Dorsey to unverify me while allowing for no-name bloggers and no-name activists on the left who have 500 Twitter followers when I had 265,000 followers to be verified, I mean, clearly that's bias, right? And even then, he said he wasn't going to verify anybody anymore after he took away verifications on in November of 2017.
It's still been verifying people.
Single time, like a left-wing person comes up on the scene, they verify him. They verified the guy who threw an egg at Fraser Anning, that Australian senator who made truthful but controversial remarks following the Christchurch mosque shooting. So clearly, Jack Dorsey is a liar. Clearly, Twitter does not uphold their own rules and their own statements. And that's why last week I filed a lawsuit against Twitter and the Council on American Islamic Relations, because following my permanent ban from Twitter in November of this last year, 2018, the day before Thanksgiving, of course, that just shows you how nice Jack Dorsey is, right? He had to go out of his way to ruin my Thanksgiving with my family and ban me on Thanksgiving simply because I called Ilhan Omar anti-Jewish, something that both the left and the right agree on.
Even Nancy Pelosi stated that.
Even Nancy Pelosi, right? So he banned me, and the excuse was that I committed hate speech because I said that, isn't it ironic how the Twitter moment of the day is a picture of Ilhan Omar, as their representation of minority rights, when Ilhan's anti-Jewish. Jewish people are more of a minority than Muslims, right? When you look at it, there's 15 million Jews worldwide. In the world, okay? We're not talking about here in the United States. There's 15 million Jews left in the world, and there's 2 billion Muslims. So as far as I'm concerned, that makes me a minority, not Ilhan Omar. And so then I was talking about how under Sharia law, which Ilhan Omar supports, homosexuals are killed and women are abused, something that's both true. Because if I recall, just a few weeks ago, I saw the leftists on Twitter freaking out about how in Brunei, where they just implemented Sharia, well, they've had Sharia law, they're killing and stoning gay people. Okay, so everything that I've said is completely factually correct. And I never even used the word Islam. I didn't even use the word Muslim, yet I was banned for hate speech. But then Twitter went out of their way to release a statement when Louis Farrakhan called Jews termites and said that it's okay for Louis Farrakhan to dehumanize Jewish people and call them termites and call for their eradication because it's not a violation of our terms of service.
And so there was a group, so the other thing is the group that actually lobbied to get you banned, I forget their name, but what is it again?
Council on American Islamic Relations. So this is what I started to look at.
They actually publicly admitted this in the Washington Post?
No. They admitted to the Wall Street Journal. So the Wall Street Journal did an expose about how Twitter executives and Jack Dorsey and his minions at Twitter were meeting with far left organizations in order to ban and silence conservatives and to determine what was hate speech and what wasn't. So they're actually working with hate groups and terrorist organizations to get guidance on who they should ban. And obviously this is totally one-sided and partisan because the SPLC has lost all credibility. I mean, the SPLC claims to be a hate watch organization, but their founder was just forced to resign for being racist himself and allegedly sexually abusing his stepdaughter with a sex toy. So I don't understand why Dorsey thinks that those people should be giving advice as to who is and isn't allowed on social media, okay? That's why they just dropped the SPLC as a safety trust partner, I assume, right? But then they took meetings with members of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is a designated Islamic terrorist organization. And this doesn't really seem to be something that bothers Jack Dorsey because he allows for members of terrorist organizations to use his platform. And you have to understand how much of a safety threat this has been to my own life and how serious this has impacted me on a personal level. The people in Silicon Valley who are Marxist in their political leanings have decided that I, as a conservative Jewish woman who is pro-Trump, pro-Second Amendment, anti-illegal immigration, anti-Islamic terror, pro-Israel, they have decided that those views are more dangerous to conversational health and more of a threat to the internet and people online than somebody like Louis Farrakhan, who called for the eradication of Jews and said that Hitler was a great man. More than Ahmadinejad, the former Iranian leader who hangs gay people. more of a threat than Linda Sarsour, who has called for jihad against President Trump. More of a threat than Hamas, a designated Islamic terrorist organization that has in its mission statement its goal to kill Jews and eradicate Israel. More than the Muslim Brotherhood, which has a verified check mark on Twitter and is an Islamic terrorist organization. More than, the list goes on and on. Siraj Wahhaj, a co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. I mean, I could go on and on and on and give you examples of who is more hateful and more of a threat to national security and people's everyday life, let alone conversational health. But Twitter has created this false narrative that I am more of a villain than these people. Do you know what that does when you have psychotic individuals and mentally deranged people on the internet who think that they have a duty to take people like me out? There are people walking around that think that I'm honestly more of a threat than dictators and Islamic nations who are killing gay people, or members of actual terrorist organizations, simply because I'm a conservative. I mean, not only has Jack Dorsey deplatformed me and caused me to lose 90% of my income because I'm a journalist and I report the facts, maybe in a very aggressive way that some people may or may not agree with, but he's endangered my life. Okay, and Jack Dorsey gets to enjoy the pleasure of having a multi-million-dollar security detail to protect him when he gets death threats from organizations like ISIS who threatened to kill him once. But then I don't get the same pleasure. I mean, I have a hard time, coming up with money to even pay my bills because as a journalist, I was making most of my money by having my Twitter account. And then PayPal banned me too. And PayPal didn't even give me a reason for why they banned me. They said that
also banned from Medium as well. What was that about? Because you were one of the first people to get banned from Medium, and you were kind of the canary in the coal mine.
Right. So PayPal said that Laura Loomer's values aren't our values, which is essentially like saying we're leftists and Laura Loomer's a Trump supporter, so we're going to ban her.
Yeah.
I didn't even violate their terms of service. But meanwhile, CARE, which I said is a terrorist organization who I'm suing along with Twitter, they're allowed to use PayPal. So terrorists are allowed to use PayPal, okay? But I'm not allowed to because I support President Trump. I mean, it's just insanity what these people in Silicon Valley
it's just, to me, like there's that meme right now going around that we live in clown world. I mean, this seems like a clown world type situation to me where like you literally have terrorist organizations using these social media platforms, but you're being banned for supposed hate speech. So what is hate speech to you? What does that mean?
There's no such thing as hate speech, first of all. Like, we live in America. Twitter is an American company. And if they want to start sending out notices to people that they're in violation of Pakistani law, which is what they're actually doing, Twitter is now sending notices to people who post facts about Islam saying, you are in violation of Pakistani Sharia law, and we advise you to seek counsel. Well, then maybe Jack Dorsey ought to, move and pack up Twitter, get out of San Francisco and go reincorporate his business in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Iran. Yeah. Okay? Because I don't think it's fair for him to be subjecting Americans to Sharia Islamic blasphemy laws, okay, and punishing people for using their First Amendment right. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're not inciting violence against somebody and you're not engaging in pedophilia or promoting terrorism, you should be allowed to use social media. And there's no reason why people like myself are deplatformed and banned when actual terrorist organizations recognized as such by the United States Department of State, okay, Twitter is an American company. Jack Dorsey is an American citizen. He abides by U.S. law, okay? And he is going against United States law by giving access to a terrorist organization. But then, oh my God, let's ban Laura Loomer because she's more of a threat than the people who are kidnapping Israelis and killing them and committing suicide bombings in Gaza, okay?
And you've also been banned from Uber and Lyft. And one of the tweets that like routinely comes up when you search your name is you said you don't want to ride in a Uber or Lyft with a Muslim driver. What is the backstory behind that?
I don't want to because Uber, and I don't think that that's hateful to say, okay? There's a double standard. I see articles all the time written by these, deranged feminists in Silicon Valley who say things like, oh, well, I don't want to ride in an Uber with white men because of toxic masculinity and white people are evil. So how is that any different than, me saying I mean, that's, first of all, Islam isn't even a race, right? So what we need to establish here is that all of the justifications that these people are giving for banning me are completely false, because Islam is a political ideology. Okay. You cannot call me a racist and say that Laura Loomer is a white supremacist and a racist because of what she said about Islam or Muslims, when Muslim and Islam is not a race. But then meanwhile, it's totally acceptable by these people, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, to allow for women to demonize an entire race of people, white people, and also say that white men should not be allowed to drive for Uber because of toxic masculinity. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a more dangerous comment than me pointing out the fact that Uber doesn't conduct proper background checks on their employees, and making a factual observation that Uber has a lot of Muslim drivers, and making another factual comment that the guy who killed 8 people in New York City on Halloween in 2017 was a Muslim, was an Islamic immigrant, was an Uber driver, and didn't have a valid license. And he also happened to be an ISIS terrorist, and he killed 8 people. And so I think that Uber, instead of banning me, they should have realized, wow, we have a problem when ISIS terrorists are allowed to be drivers for us, okay? And they don't even have valid driver's licenses. Maybe we ought to do more secure background checks, because 8 people are now dead because of us. But then when you look at the breakdown of Silicon Valley, and you look at who the biggest financial, like the shareholders are, and the stockholders, and the CEOs, well, Uber has an Iranian, a Muslim CEO. Okay, so instead of addressing this issue, which he should have done, okay, he decided to ban me, and it was a big story. And then I got banned from Lyft too. I wasn't even in an Uber or a Lyft when I tweeted what I tweeted. Okay. I was there. I saw the dead bodies on the ground, but nobody wanted to talk about that. Nobody wanted to talk about the fact that 8 people are now dead because Uber, being so selfish, is
just for context. You tweeted that after that happened, or around the same time?
I tweeted that the day that it happened. So it's
the
not
day
like
that actual terrorist attack happened is the day you tweeted that.
Yeah, I was there. I was there.
That's some context, because that was one of the things that was brought up when when you agreed to come on the show, is, oh, she tweeted this, and I was like, I don't know what the context is, so I can't tell you if that's hate speech or not.
Nobody ever talks about the context of what I said, okay? Like, they just want to forget that an ISIS terrorist who happens to drive for Uber, whose name literally translates from Arabic into sword of Allah, right? Like, maybe the CEO of Uber shouldn't be hiring people whose names literally mean sword of Allah. Just a pointer. It's just egregious to me how far we've come as a society, where journalists and CEOs are willing to ruin someone's life and leave out a huge piece of context, which is the fact that an ISIS terrorist was driving for Uber and killed 8 people. I didn't just go on Twitter and tweet, oh, I don't want to ride with Muslim drivers. No, there's a reason why I said what I said. And this isn't even the first time it's happened. Uber has hired multiple ISIS terrorists and multiple Muslim men who have committed rape. One of their Muslim drivers actually murdered a woman by the name of Rebecca Dykes. And then when he was asked why he murdered her, he said, well, because she wasn't a Muslim and her skirt was too short. So he raped her and killed her. Did Uber ever release a statement apologizing for this? No, they didn't. So, it's a problem.
Uber and Lyft both have problems just with sexual assault in general. It's a major problem on these platforms that, neither company has really seemed to take responsibility for at all. So, gosh, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here. Typically I'm interviewing tech professionals. So you're one of the first times that I'm having a journalist on who's, not a tech professional on this show. But I wanted to get you on so that, people in Silicon Valley could hear what it's like to be deplatformed, because I don't think they understand that, we have this public square now that is where conversations are taking place. This is how our society functions now, where, going on Twitter, going on these social media platforms, that's how we interact. Like, I recently just got engaged. The amount of reaction, that's how we let most of our family and friends know that's how the world works now. It's not like I'm going to call 100 people. So these days you go on social media, you get messages out, and that's what you do. And as a journalist, it's so difficult when, you're being, I suspect even some of my accounts have been shadow banned, because the number of people I used to be able to reach just a couple of years ago versus the number of people I can reach today, like, and I've got more followers today than I had back then, has decreased. So and then in your case, you've been just outright banned. So like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why is the tech industry targeting American citizens and taking away their right to free speech?
Well, I really believe that it has a lot to do with the fact that they are so heavily influenced by Muslim money. And it's not a conspiracy theory. When you look at Twitter, for example, one of the largest shareholders is Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, who is arguably one of the biggest sponsors of global terrorism. I mean, why does this guy, who is funding global Wahhabist terrorism around the world and was recently locked away for corruption charges in Saudi Arabia, why is he owning more Twitter stock than Jack Dorsey himself? And then it kind of starts to make sense, right? Why you're not even allowed to say the word Muslim. You're not even allowed to say that something was an act of Islamic terrorism without getting banned. You're not allowed to criticize Muslim politicians who have direct ties to terrorist organizations or make anti-Jewish and anti-American, anti-Christian comments, right? It really starts to make sense when you look at it. They are taking meetings with the ADL, taking meetings with SPLC, the Council on American Islamic Relations, groups that have an explicit anti-Trump, anti-conservative bias. So that's why, okay? And it's not a surprise. I mean, there have been recordings released from Google meetings where, you have employees crying and talking about how they need to work behind the scenes to make sure that Trump can't win a second term. Well, maybe that's why all of my emails are going to my junk folder or the spam folder. And then they try to make these justifications like, oh, Laura Loomer is a white supremacist neo-Nazi and she supports President Trump, so let's prevent her from making an income. What if the tables were turned? I would love to ask the people in Silicon Valley how they would feel if the people who were in charge were conservative, okay? And how would you feel if the conservatives were like, you know what? I really just don't like the fact that these people like Hillary Clinton. I don't like the fact that these people voted for Obama. I don't like the fact that these people are who they are. So we're just going to ban them and we're going to prevent them from making an income. And whenever they say something we don't like, we're just going to silence them and we're going to keep banning them and we're going to shadow ban them. We're going to delete their tweets. We're going to put them in Facebook jail for 30 days. And we're just going to keep doing this. And then we're going to have meetings with banking executives and we're going to tell them that we don't want liberals to be able to pay their bills or be able to feed their children. And we're just going to be very, very secretive about it. And we're not going to tell anyone because we don't want to get in trouble, but we're going to just, every so often ban a prominent conservative so they can't get paid on PayPal. And then we're going to tell Chase Bank to do the same thing. I mean, we're at a point right now where actual banking institutions are banning people because of their politics. Mm-hmm. And so for all of these self-righteous leftists in Silicon Valley who think that I'm an evil person or that I shouldn't have a right to make a living in America or I shouldn't have a right to voice my opinion, imagine if the tables were turned. Imagine if the tables were turned.
I mean, if the tables were turned, I don't know what this is. I mean, even I've been targeted. I've had some death threats. I've had some crazy stuff because of my writings on Medium and some of these other publications. And I personally, I'm a little more on the left. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I know what's happening in the tech industry and I know what's coming with automation and I know how many jobs it's going to destroy. So it's pushed me a little bit more towards the left in some ways because it's like, I don't know what the solutions are moving forward. Because I'm concerned that capitalism as we know it today is possibly dead because of artificial intelligence. Once a lot of these AI systems, the AI systems that have been shadow banning us, identifying us, tagging us, a lot of the stuff that, even Donald Trump used Cambridge Analytica and social profiles, and this is happening on both sides of the political spectrum. We are now at a point where the technology is, and the access to that technology is dictating who is in power. And that is unfortunately eroding the ability of free markets to be able to have capitalism. So what do you do when you've got the tech industry who's got all this power, all the computing power, they've got artificial intelligence to be able to do all of these things, and nobody else has that? That's how you get companies like Amazon. That's how you get monopolies like Google. That's how you start to get into these situations, is because now no one can compete. Startups can't compete. Even other Fortune 100 companies are struggling to compete. So there is a valid concern, and I don't know what the solution is, because automation is a real threat to capitalism and our way of life in America. At the same time, this is an American country that was built on civil liberties, and liberty. On the other hand, part of me is also a libertarian, because and my views, I'm kind of like torn between the two, and I usually end up somewhere in the center personally, because that's normal. And you get slammed as a far extreme, right, conservative, and I have to remind people that like 50% of the country agrees with you and voted for the same person you voted for, and he won the election. Like that's half of America.
Right.
This isn't
why people on the left are so anti-Trump. I don't understand why they're so determined to silence him and his supporters. I mean, these people in Silicon Valley and on the left, like, they don't want to hire white men anymore, right? I mean, that's the newest thing, is like, no white men are allowed to work in Silicon Valley.
They're targeting Asian men as well.
Whitey bad, all right? We're only allowed to hire trans people and no Asians allowed because they're too smart, and no white people, just black people and Hispanic people, and lots and lots and lots of Muslims, okay? And, preferably atheists. We don't want anybody who believes in God. I mean, like, it's just so bizarre the way that they're trying to force diversity onto people, because they accuse people like me of hate speech, but their actions are actually hateful. By trying to demonize people like you, a white male, by trying to tell people that they can't have a job doing what they are passionate about simply because of the color of their skin. And it's absolute insanity. And Donald Trump, as a president, has made it. He's, under his presidency, Black unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. Latino unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. I see this whole thing, women in tech get so triggered when people tell them how to learn how to code. And now there's this whole movement to push men out of Silicon Valley and give women jobs, even if they're not really deserving or not as accomplished as the male counterpart who applies for the same job, right? But even jobs under Trump's administration for women have soared. Female unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. So what are these people complaining about? I don't understand what they're so unhappy about.
It just comes down to ideology. And ultimately, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before we were recording. I'm a local. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. And, what's happened to San Francisco and the city that I was born in, it's been destroyed by globalist politics. It's been destroyed by, a lot of these left-leaning policies that have literally, our streets are covered in shit and needles. I mean, it's literally to that point now, to the point where even I'm considering leaving, and, this has been my home my entire life. So it's really difficult, because the actions of what people are saying versus what people are actually doing, they're not matching up. So anyhow, I've got to ask, what is some time in your life that you've had to hack something?
Well, I had to hack the internet when I was banned from Twitter. And so when I handcuffed myself to the Twitter headquarter office in New York City, and I was able to trend #1 on Twitter worldwide, above President Trump and Putin, I feel like I hacked the internet in real life. And it's just proof to these tyrants in Silicon Valley that my ideas are actually mainstream ideas. My ideas are powerful, and no matter what you do to silence me, and no matter what you do to censor me, I'm always going to find a way to make my voice heard. And so, for Jack Dorsey, who, he did an interview actually with the Rolling Stone magazine, and it was funny because they asked him, oh, what did you think about Laura Loomer handcuffing herself to Twitter? And he goes, oh, well, I actually really respect Laura because, she speaks truth to power, and it's just so punk rock what she did. And, you have to ask yourself, like, if that's really the case, well, then why won't you sit down with me and have a meeting with me? Why won't you talk to me about censorship? Why won't you have a talk with me about why I was banned? Why won't you give me a reason? And so, look, it's just, I hate that it has to get legal, but it has to get legal. And that's why I filed a lawsuit against Twitter and Care.
Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I just want to thank you for having me on. And, I appreciate you giving me a voice and allowing me to use my voice. And, I appreciate it. Most people have just labeled me and they won't allow me to have a platform. So thank you.
Well, when there's situations like the situation you're in right now, it's like the only person that can provide your side of the story is you. So I had to talk to you to find out like what is your side of the story, because I can Google as much as I want, but I know how biased Google is, and I know how biased the media has become. And it's just like we live in this clown world where, there's just so much misinformation and there's so many things. I think a lot of people who are going to listen to this are going to be rather confused when they actually hear from your perspective what's actually been going on, because it's so opposite to what's available when you search for your name.
Right. Yeah, no, it is. So, and nothing I've ever done shows up. I've done a lot of really important work, and, I'm not a hateful person. I'm against anti-Semitism. I do a lot of work to combat anti-Semitism. I do a lot of work to expose corruption on both sides of the aisle. And it's unfortunate that these companies have worked to suppress me so much, because everything that shows up under my name on Google is just a hit piece. Everything. It's just false information. And these people will go to any length to smear me and make it so that no one can really know who I truly am. And it's also really funny because people who, like yourself, right, who may not be completely politically aligned with me, have reached out, and they always tell me that they actually really like me and they actually agree with me a lot of the time, because I'm not a hateful person. I'm not a neo-Nazi. I'm not a white supremacist. And if people actually just spent some time getting to know me and having a conversation with me like you did, they would realize, wow, like her opinions actually make a lot of sense. And I actually agree with a lot of what she says. I'm not even far right. It's the funniest thing. I'm actually socially fairly libertarian. And so, I don't have a problem with gay people. Okay. I have a gay brother. I don't have a problem with transgender people. I'm not a racist. Okay. I'm just very critical about Islamic immigration because, well, we have a problem, we have a serious problem. And I think that after seeing what just happened in Sri Lanka this past weekend, and the media's reaction and their kind of refusal to call it what it is, and you compare that to their coverage of the Christchurch mosque shooting, you see how much of a double standard there is. And so that makes me angry. And I'm not going to self-censor myself and not say things that are truthful simply because some people find it offensive. And I don't deserve to be silenced and shut down and prevented from making a living and doing what I went to school to do. I have a degree in journalism. I was valedictorian. I had a 4.0 GPA. And people like Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg don't have the right to tell me that I don't have a right to be a journalist in the digital era simply because I'm a conservative.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is typically the part of the show where I ask people where they can find you, but you've been banned from most of the platforms. I think you're only pretty much left on Instagram. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, but the left last week launched a campaign to try to get me banned there too for posting facts about Ilhan Omar and Islam, of course. But I'm on Instagram. You can follow me. My handle's Loomered. I also have a website. It's lauraloomer.us, and my website is freeloomer.com. So you can go to freeloomer.com and sign my petition to stop social media bias. And that's also where you can read my complaint. My lawsuit against Twitter and CARE, and you can see firsthand how Twitter has been meeting with Islamic terrorist organizations to silence Jews and conservatives, something that Jack Dorsey is desperately trying to hide and avoid talking about, and something he'll never talk about because he's a liar, he's a coward, and he doesn't really like answering questions. We've all seen that. We all watched the Joe Rogan podcast and saw how he and his legal counsel dodged questions. These people are not in the business of telling the truth and being honest, okay? So read it yourself, and then you'll see, and then you'll realize that there is a problem. Because if you're anti-terrorism and you're pro-free speech, well, this should really concern you.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for watching another uncensored episode of TechPost.io. I'm your host, Trent Lipinski, and don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that little notification bell next to the subscribe button so that you can get notified when we release new episodes. You can also find us on iTunes, Google Play, and other social networks, including Twitter and Facebook, at TechPost.io, and you can find me personally at Trent Lipinski. Once again, I'm Trent Lipinski, and this has been another great episode of TechPost.io. We'll see you soon.